I must say thank you very much for inviting us to come and talk to you today. I'm going to talk with my colleague Rick, who will be joining me in a minute, to talk about a project that we've been working on at the Open University in the UK for the past 5 years, examining children's programmes that contain science on television with a view to seeing how that science content may or may not influence their understanding and impressions of science, technology, engineering and maths. So we've been listening to children's views about television programmes with the express purpose of helping others develop those programmes and specifically the science content in those programmes. I'd like to point out that we had some reports from our project on the table outside there. Quite a few of them have already gone, I think, but all our materials are available on our website. The link you can see on this slide here, which we'll remind you of later. Just to put this in a bit of context, I was involved just a couple of years ago with a project that was commissioned by the Institute of Physics in the UK to try and explain why so few girls were interested in pursuing physics in higher education, so dropped out of it at school level. So I did an extensive review with a colleague of mine, Patricia Murphy, at the Open University, and amongst those, that very complex web of interacting factors that was held responsible for students not being interested in physics, particularly girls, and in science in general, key themes that came out of that review focused particularly around students' self-concept. Girls in particular couldn't see a place for themselves in science in the future, and their self-efficacy, their competence, their belief in their own competence in science declined as they went through the teenage years. And those two factors, particularly self-concept, have a very strong effect, affect greatly the development of a student's identity. And if they don't see an identity for themselves within science in the future, then they're unlikely to be interested in pursuing it or interested in looking at it beyond the compulsory stage of school. So having spent some time looking at that position within schools, I then wanted to look at other influences on students' engagement with STEM outside the classroom. So that led me to join with Rick and another colleague who's not here today, Jennifer Carr, to work on our project which we called Invisible Witnesses. This title may not mean a lot to people who are not UK based. We have a long running TV show, a bit like CSI, called Silent Witnesses in the UK, which was very, very popular and was held by some to have increased the registrations of women going to university to study forensic science. So that was a sort of an initial indicator that television, some time ago, television can have an effect on people's attitudes towards science. The project was funded by our UK Resources Centre for Women in Science, Engineering and Technology, and this is the lead government body for gender and science, technology and engineering in the UK. We did 2 phases of the project. There was the first phase, a content phase, where we looked at the established stereotypes of women in science and girls in science, technology, engineering and maths on television, those that existed already that were found within children's programmes. And we explored what alternative representations there were beyond the very stereotypical ones that we're all familiar with. Then we did a reception study, and here we were very much working with children as active audiences and research participants to investigate their media literacy, which after all is in today's world with all the digital platforms that people have access to is as important as functional literacy was years ago. If people don't know how to use websites and other ways of getting information electronically, they are at a serious disadvantage. So why did we particularly want to look at media literacy on this project? So we define media literacy, and this is a definition used by our Office for Communications, government body in the UK. The ability to access, understand, and particularly create communications in a variety of contexts. So that by looking at creativity, we're very much combining both our data collection and our analytical methods. We've got to focus on both the product and the process, and that gives us some level of cooperation in our research account. So it's about asking the participants, in this case children, to make visible some of their thinking, which otherwise might be hidden and might be assumed by the researchers. And we needed to ask the children involved to conceptualise an audience for the product that we were asking them to create, and produce something that would be appropriate for people like them, a television story or show, with those parameters in mind. We went about this. This is going to be particularly the focus of the talk today. We could have focused a lot on our content study, but obviously time is limited, so all the rest of that information is in the reports. We had 62 young people aged 10 to 16 years that we worked with on a couple of occasions. And this is just a list of the methods we used for the project, which, as I say, time doesn't really give us enough space to go into in detail. We started off by getting them to do a questionnaire which drew out what their views of science and scientists, technologists, engineers and mathematicians were, based on existing questionnaires that were used with large cohorts of people. We did the Draw a Scientist test, which you saw an illustration of one example of that on the first slide I showed. Rick will talk a bit more about that in a minute. We asked them to interpret some images from the TV sample that we collected for our content analysis in the first phase, and then to design a storyboard, a series of cartoon clips that showed how they would like to develop a TV series, what content they would like to see in a TV series that was most attractive to them, that represented STEM. They were then asked to do some reflective writing about how they saw themselves in the future if they were engaged in a STEM career. So how they position themselves in science. And finally, an evaluation which asked them to write a letter of recommendation about the TV series that they'd like to see most produced from the ones that the rest of the group, all the other groups, had produced. To give you a more thorough understanding of what our data consisted of and how we used it, I just want to take you through one person's output, if you like, of the data for our project, with a bit of audio talking about her views of some of the images she saw on television in science and what she thought about them. Not sure that's going to come up, unfortunately. No, could try that.
When it comes to that Martha character in Doctor Who, I think she's the sort of character you would aspire to because she's more independent and cooler, really. Having that sort of role on television is good because it does make people like me, even though I don't want to do science, but people who might do at my age would more aspire to be that sort of character than the typical Einstein sort of character. That's sort of seen as boring now. Like, loads of my friends are interested in doing science at uni rather than something that would be thought to be like womanly or feminine or something. I don't know, it shows that it doesn't really matter like genders and stuff, and it means that more girls my age are starting to become interested in sciences.
Thank you. Word 7. Okay. So that was an example of one student's talking about one of the characters in a long-running, over 30-year running TV series called Doctor Who in the UK that has developed some very positive and alternative types of scientists in the show.
When it comes to that Martha character in Doctor Who, I think she...
Sorry. Okay. This is another example of her. This particular participant's drawing of the scientist that has all the typical signifiers of science in that drawing, which Rick will mention in a minute. And finally, an example of some of the cartoon storyboards that the group she was in drew. And in general, when we talk about conceptualizing an audience, most of the groups would conceptualize something for people like them, but younger than them. So this is about a quiz show, which is also a very popular format that the children in our sample tended to want to see on television, featuring science, that was to do with saving the world using various aspects of science, technology, and engineering and maths. So our project, really, the findings from our project are very much emphasising the creative nature of developing a research project like this that has shown that students at this age, the 10 to 16-year-old, are very media literate. They do understand the role of different broadcasters, commercial, public service. They are aware of the need to contain some education within television programmes. They want them to be entertaining, but they also think that they have some educational role to play. The need for the programme to be age appropriate, and the opportunities offered by interactive and multi-platform programming. So a lot of the research into the ways ways children and young people focus on television programmes are the research is looking at how to help children find the programmes that they might want to watch and to avoid content that isn't appropriate. But by developing this creative approach, we're very much enabling them to conceptualise an audience in a much broader sense, and to tell us what it is that they want to see on television, and so help them receive the messages that actually we would prefer them to get about science, technology, engineering, maths on television. So I'm going to hand over to Rick now, who's going to take us a little bit further into some of the analytical understanding that we've developed from the programme.